So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Melvin Brandflute from Livework. Livework Studio, I think, is or Livework is the big name, but Livework Studio is sort of the name of your, sort of just the company, I guess. So, but I'm sure you're going to correct me on this, Melvin. But for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a bit about you and tell us a bit about the work that you do?
So it's Livework Studios. We are 5 studios in 3 in Europe, 1 in the Middle East, and 1 in South America. And what we do is we help organizations design the services and the customer experience, not just from a customer perspective, but it's the challenging bit where we actually bring it into the organization and the business.
Okay.
And I'm one of the 3 partners of Livework. My background is more on the business and the consulting side, while most of the rest of the organization comes from a design background and is very well versed in actually communicating and finding very understandable ways of communicating with businesses, customers, and organizations.
Okay. And is the work that you do, is it essentially sort of service design, like the service design network and the principles of service design, or is it more than that?
So originally, Livework started as the first full-fledged service design agency, about 13 years ago, almost 14 years ago. And over the last 3 to 4 years, we invested quite heavily in making service design very useful and applicable in business and in organizational settings.
Okay.
So designing the service from a customer perspective and the customer experience is a great challenge. But the bigger one is really, how does an organization actually affect these designs so the customers have a better experience, or those services start to do meaningful performances, which generally they don't.
Right. Okay. So then the reason that we got sort of teed up, I mean, apart from the fact that we've sort of vaguely sort of connected before, and then we had a bit of a chat, and one of the reasons I invited you onto the podcast was to talk about some of the work that you're doing around sort of irritation curves, and our conversation sort of came about. I mean, I guess the impetus from it was on the back of a piece that I wrote earlier this year called "The Little Things That Destroy Your Customer Experience," and how that was related to some of the irritation curves research that you were doing. So can you tell me a little bit more about the research that you're doing around irritation curves?
So to give a bit of context to the irritation curves is that if you look at customers, and I mean the total customer base of any organization or business, there are so many things that irritate the customers. So in insurance, for instance, people focus on the claims aspect and saying, that's it takes so much time, there's not a lot of clarity, it causes a lot of irritations. And there's a great investment in by insurance companies to make the claims process more transparent and more helpful. However, insurance, being insured and understanding what you're insured for or what you're paying for, also causes anxieties or irritations with the customers, and that's something that doesn't receive as much attention.
Right.
So what we've done is we looked at several sectors, and in total we're up to 14, I think, where we've defined what the total customer experience is for that sector. So if we take insurance or banking or telephony, customers in those sectors have specific experiences as they become a customer, as they're in the first usage of the product or service, and as they change the use of the product or service, or have an incident like, for instance, the claims process. We map then what are the positives and what are the negatives that they're experiencing, and most specifically, what irritates them. And irritation is very easy to articulate by a customer. This is what I find irritating because if you talk about an experience, how do you experience, for instance, the claim process, you get a more vague and more generic answer. But irritation is something usually around, I don't like to wait.
Yeah.
Or the information that's been provided to me is not clear. Or I've been misinformed, or in some cases lied to.
Okay.
Those are very explicit irritations that you'll find across the different stages of the customer life cycle.
And what are the implications of those sort of irritations on overall, if you like, what have you found rather in terms of the impact of those irritations on people's or customers' engagement with businesses and overall loyalty and retention? Or is it a little bit early to tell on that?
I think that's a really good question because there's a lot of talk about loyalty and relationship with customers, but from a service perspective, the best service you can offer is actually not being irritating.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds very counterintuitive, but the thing, when you irritate a customer, especially when a customer is early in the use or acquisition of your product or services, that memory is pretty long lasting.
Right.
So what we're finding in but the data with our clients, but also our interviews with customers is one of the primary reasons why people leave a service provider or a company or de facto another product is the experience they had or the irritations they encountered while having to deal with the organization.
Mm-hmm.
The irritations seldom have to do directly with the product itself. I mean, the car runs, the mobile contract works. You can call, you can pick up your passport at the government agencies. But the way they treat you in achieving those particular tasks or achieving those particular needs, fulfilling those needs, that's where the irritations come from. And in some cases, they're that extreme that the customer will say they'll decide there and then that it will break the relationship.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because that relates back to a piece that I wrote recently about the longest lasting emotions.
Yes.
Relates to another piece of research, and I sort of applied that to customer experience. And it's fascinating how the longest lasting emotions are surround things like disappointment, anxiety, uncertainty, all of those sort of things, which would be aligned with irritation, I guess. And it's funny how our brains work, that we remember those things much longer than we do anything to do with sort of delight and or wow or pleasure. And I think that so it has a fascinating implication for how people prioritize how they design things.
There are two things to it. The first thing is people assume irritations are human kind of characteristics, only exist in a business-to-consumer market. But if you look at business-to-business relationships, those things are self-evident as well. So, and let's take a setting where an organization sells a large 3-year contract with for a specific service, and the process, as far as they're concerned, has gone very well. But in the course of signing a contract, or perhaps just after, there are a couple of things where the service provider is completely failing the customer there and then. Right. Overall, they perform well for 3 years, but the customer will still reject the contract when it's up for renewal because the initial experience of working with them has been so poor. Yeah. And that's one of the things that also in a business setting that's severely underestimated, that the effects of not performing well or not performing up to expectations, or even worse, irritations. Yeah. And the other thing is, if you actually look at the quantifiable aspect of the irritations, it means that those irritations are usually not unique to one customer. They're repeated and repeatable to customers, and you find quite a lot of those things that a customer irritates customers when you are actually relevant to them. Right. So when you sign a contract or buy something, your product and service is top of mind because that's what they're busy with. Right. The other thing is, if you think something like an energy or a subscription type service, the annual renewal is another time where the customers become relevant to you as a business, but not the other way around because they don't really care. So organizations invest quite heavily on their cycles, the monthly, the annual, or whatever the cycle is, where they want to pick up the relationship and ignore the cycles from a customer perspective. Mm-hmm. So if you take the energy companies, if you take this time of year, around December, January, that's when we actually use most of our energy. And that's where in consumption and money, we're very well aware of the of what our energy provider does. That's not a good time to tell me how much my bill is going to increase over the next couple of months or years. You might want to wait a couple of months when it's summertime and have a better frame of reference to start engaging me around that particular topic. Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting because if an organization accepts there are certain cycles from a customer perspective, they certainly can improve on their communication and reduce those irritations.
Right, okay. And so what are the implications for businesses and organizations that you find? You can identify these irritations, but what are the implications when it comes to sort of designing a better or a great sort of customer experience?
So the irritations occur they usually occur in certain groups, and
Okay.
that's where the product or service is most relevant to the customer who gets irritated.
Hmm.
So the early stages of a customer becoming a customer is where it occurs. The implications of that is that the customer will be with you for the duration of the contract or the life of the product, but most likely is going to defect. So an extreme result of irritating a customer is defection.
Right.
But there's even another one, and that is while they're having that experience, they will actually share that knowledge or experience, if it's extreme, with others.
Right.
And that will actually color how people perceive the product or service performed by this company.
Sure.
And to give you an example, we work with a public transport company in Scandinavia, and they're perceived to be extremely irritating and extremely wrong in how they treat their customers.
Yeah.
If you look at the facts, the data, and how they perform, on time and quality of service, they're actually doing quite well.
Mm-hmm.
But the perception is very much one of extreme irritation. And working with them over a year, they actually acknowledged that they are irritating the customer, and the CEO stepped up and said, "We will stop irritating you, the customer."
Mm-hmm.
Having made that public statement and actually acting on it has actually made them very credible. They recognize that they're failing customers at their convenience, their customers' convenience, and in saying that, they said, "We will try and reduce those irritations for you before we try to offer you anything else better or nicer." Because we have to fix the things that irritate you. So the implication of recognizing those irritations for this particular company is that their reputation and their standing has tremendously increased, as has their perception of what they do for the general public.
Right.
And we have other examples like that.
And I mean, so I guess you can acknowledge that, you can become aware of that, you can acknowledge it, but then I guess the most important thing, it's a bit like asking for somebody's opinion and then not doing anything about it. I guess the next thing is like, actually you've got to get down in the weeds and fix some of these things.
Well, that's the good news, because irritations usually are not easy to fix, but they're easy to take steps to either prevent or prevention is a better way of actually than fixing them. So in the case of public transport, the perception of me standing out in the cold for 5 minutes is very different than me being in a bus waiting for 5 minutes.
Sure.
5 minutes in a bus feels like 5 minutes, 5 minutes in the cold feels like 10. Mm-hmm. So just those simple steps, as letting the people into the bus to wait, makes a tremendous difference and thereby reduces the irritations. The other example really is when you're signing a contract for any kind of service, when you're signing it, the customer doesn't really understand what they're signing for or what they're signing up to. Mm-hmm. And it causes a level of anxiety depending on the service and the money involved. Mm-hmm. Just explaining it at a very basic level and pointing to the section in the contract which nobody fully understands already helps with that anxiety or helps with the irritation of not feeling that you're being sold to.
Yeah.
So those interventions are really small, very tangible, and they have tangible results in the relationship with the people who experience those things.
Okay. Is all of this just customer journey mapping and monitoring and figuring out the gaps between what is a customer's journey and service delivery?
So a customer journey is usually how an organization looks at the way they think a customer should experience them. So they map the steps they like the customer to take, or kind of how they see the customer experiencing it. We're looking at the life cycle, so we're not looking at any kind of business individually. We're looking at the customers in general. So if I'm actually a customer for one telecoms provider, and I switch customers, technically I'm in two different journeys because they mapped me differently.
Okay.
If you look at a higher level, I'm still on the same life cycle, meaning that I'm about to switch for whatever reason. And that's where I am. I'm in the mode to actually decide to take a new provider because the old one, for whatever reason, is no longer the one I choose. Mm-hmm. So I'm in the decision phase, and how I journey through it using online channels or other touch points can vary.
Okay.
So if you take the touch point, if you take the journey perspective, then you would follow my path through how I actually do these things, and I will encounter irritations. If you look at anybody who's in the decide phase of deciding what my next contract provider is going to be, then you see more similarity and you see more of this persistent irritations that are there, regardless of the journey I'm taking.
Okay. And how would you find these irritations? I mean, is that just you have to go out and ask and look for them, or is it that Is it done just through sort of monitoring, survey data, or what's the best way to find these irritations?
I don't know if there's a best way, but there's a very obvious way. And usually the obvious places to find those irritations are within the organization itself, it being the call center, being the different contact points where people interact from business or interact with their customers. But also, obviously, you need to reach out to actual customers, not only from the company, but from other companies as well. Because these irritations usually are not specific to a company. They're generic to a sector.
Okay.
If you take insurance, for instance, then you would see similar irritations in some of the financial products that you see. If you take energy, you see similar irritations to mobile services, so utility type irritations.
Yeah. Okay. And what sort of gains have you seen kind of companies make by I feel like addressing or going out and identifying these irritations and then working towards acknowledging them and telling people they're going to do something about it, and then actually going about addressing them? I mean, what sort of gains are we talking about? Is this like small beer, or is this big numbers?
These can be very big numbers. So all these irritations that we work with our clients with, we test and pilot. So it's not hypothetical. We get finding them is one thing, but then finding the solutions to them is the other. And in finding them, we test and pilot them in real life settings. So either with real customers, real settings, real contracts, whatever, where we can actually see if an intervention earlier has changed the irritation or has taken it completely away. In order to give you a number, I cannot give you an exact number, but in some of the cases where in a sales process, where at the end of the sales process, the customer is kind of left hanging, leaving a lot of irritation and frustration. If you just cater to that, we saw the effect of, let's see, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people actually bringing in another customer to experience the same thing. So basically, it had an effect of people being brought in through word of mouth.
Okay.
But more than word of mouth, word of conviction. Not saying it's a great thing. It's saying, no, this actually worked for me.
Right.
On the cynical side, and some of those, taking away some of those things that actually cause irritations, like, for instance, simplifying a contract, we found a very interesting effect where the customers are so cynical, where they say, it cannot be this simple. What are you not telling me?
Right.
What are you hiding from me by offering me this excellent service? So I think to be in that position is one of luxury instead of one of need as a business. But we've kind of, as businesses, we've educated our customers to be pretty cynical about us. Okay. And whenever you're actually performing well or less irritating, it does trigger that level of cynicism, saying there's something behind what you're offering or giving me now.
Yeah. Okay. And so if I was who would you typically sort of engage with? Where does this sort of journey start within an organization? I mean, is it at the chief marketing officer level? Is it at the CX department level, or what sort of level where will this sort of inquiry or this path, if you like, originate in an organization?
So we're seldom asked to map out the irritations. It's a tool that we use to explain what the potentials are or what the problems are in the relationship with customers. Okay. So we're being engaged either by, at a very senior level, saying this is something we want to do with our business or service, or we have a new system or new service innovation we want to bring to market, and we don't want to make the obvious mistakes we always make. So that's one type of client we would approach us. On the complete opposite of that might be somebody who's really tasked to fix things. We are bleeding customers here because, and we don't fully understand how to intervene. We launched a new CRM system. We've changed our product definitions, and still customers are defecting. What's going on? Okay. So those are two very extreme examples. And the places where we're being approached, sectors we're approached from, are the ones that are very process or system heavy. And in those sectors, there's so many opportunities to improve the humanness of the service or of the engagement.
And when you say process or system heavy, does that mean that that's mostly going to be organizations that have to comply to, say, regulation? So
Could be.
Utilities, telecoms, financial services, those type of things.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that compliance doesn't always need to equal irritation.
No, not at all.
However, there's a strong relationship between the two because compliance is used as a way to regulate and structure processes in a way that it benefits the organization, and that usually is against the customer. So if you take regulated services like in banking and financial services in general, a lot of those steps are built in. Or are being introduced by government interventions, but the way they're translated into the service or the experience of the customer is just doesn't have to be this painful.
Okay. So if I was to say to you that there's an executive who's listening into this kind of podcast and he's been tasked with the idea of sort of, yeah, we need to fix this. This is not working as well as kind of we are now. And if you wanted to give them some top tips to say how to get started along that sort of journey before they actually kind of called you, let's say, where would you say that what should they do first?
I think the very first thing they can do, I'm not saying it's the best thing, is really listen and understand. And the listening needs to come from their own customer-facing part of their organization and also customers themselves. And the second step that's part of the listening is understanding. Because when those executives go out to talk to customers, or they're on the phone with a call center or whatever else, they're kind of filtering the messages that are coming through already and saying, yes, that's because we just launched this new product, or that's because we are being regulated to give you this information or withhold this information. And if you do it unfiltered, if they're able to do that, they'll actually hear the actual messages that are coming through. So just the listening is not good enough. Understanding where the customer comes from is really important. Okay. And to give you a very simple example, by the time somebody calls you, your call center, and they have tried something else in most cases. They tried online, they talk to other people. They are already at a state where they say, this is almost the final resort to resolve my issue.
Sure.
Telling them then and there that they should go online and fix it is not going to be a positive message that they'll see.
Not at all. And I guess for me the conclusion or the summary for that would be aware of Chinese whispers that exist within your organization and how you might do things normally. Because it's, sometimes, asking for unfiltered sort of feedback and listening to the unfiltered feedback is that's the imperative, I guess. That's where the real understanding and the real learning takes place.
But I guess that's also where we as a business step in, because it's very hard to be unfiltered in your in listening and understanding where your customers are coming from, because you have a bias. The only time you're kind of unbiased is when you're new to an organization or a situation. Then you don't have that investment personally or professionally into whatever you're doing or tasked with. So that's one of the reasons for a company like ourselves, we can do this without this filter, because we have no stake in your own organization. We're just looking in from the outside. And the second thing that we would do is we're not looking at your organization per se. We're looking at what is happening in your market or in your sector.
Right.
Because from a customer and irritation perspective, those things would occur regardless of who is the service provider. And understanding those fundamental things actually gives you a competitive advantage towards your competitors who are ignoring those messages.
Well, exactly, because I guess you can identify them, and if you can eliminate them, but then say, come to us because we're less, in a way, sort of a more sophisticated way, you can say, actually come to us and we're less irritating than our competitors.
I think it's a poor slogan, but that's the message.
Exactly. I mean, obviously, you'd have to work on how making it slightly more snappy, but that is the message. So, Melvin, that's been great. Thank you for your time today and for sharing your insight. And we'll make sure that all gets kind of written up, and then we'll hopefully kind of drive some traffic to liveworkstudio.com.
Look forward to that. Thank you, irritating.
Thank you.